Before we start our session tonight, our sponsor, Ken, is going to share just a few more thoughts and words with us, and then we'll jump right on it.
I want to thank everybody for coming here in person and on Zoom to hear our teacher. We all love and we miss. And I just wanted to share one thing, that when I think of Aaron, I think of Shabbat morning when we're putting the Torah back in the ark. And when he would sing Kadesh, it would resonate through the whole synagogue. And that's what we miss.
Thank you.
I could
Floor
do
is
it on
yours,
Maple
Cantor.
Road, man. So offer to sell them a recording.
Yeah.
You can do much better things with this money, trust me. So as we've been doing each and every session, as we've mentioned, we're going to do a little bit of teaching tonight on it. We're going to do actually a hybrid tonight. We're going to be talking about a little bit of a morbid subject, but one that's very necessary, which is death and Shiva. And then the second segment is going to be all about Kaddish. So tonight's session is yet again dedicated to Yael Bat Abraham Yaakov. And we pray and hope that her neshama, her soul, should have a continual ascension in heaven. She should look down upon us as she's connected in a much better place than we are. Pray for us, and God willing, everything should come to fruition. Amen. So as we look around the room, there's very few people that have not been touched by the subject tonight. Unfortunately, it's a subject that is part of life. It's part of the cycle of life, which is death. And as we know, everybody has a different mechanism for coping with death. I think one of the brilliance that our sages came up with. Now, of course, as I put this out there, it's a bit of a disclaimer, but if you go by the letter of the law, they force you into a Shiva and a grieving period facing the death right on. As soon as you go through the burial, you go to your home and you start what we know as the official Shiva process. Some people want to do like a private funeral and so don't want to deal with a Shiva because it's overwhelming. The downside to that process is that people say, I'll deal with it in my own time span. And grieving, as we know, takes a very long time for each and every person. So I think there's a lot of brilliance in making people face it head on, having people come over, giving inspirational stories about the deceased, helping pick you up. And one of the amazing things about B'nai Yeshurun is you have a daily minyan here that reaches out to people that are going through the bereavement process. So much so to the point that they start off as a mourner and end up coming well beyond the requirements just to the minyan because they find a kinsmanship. You know, many times we go through life and you look across at somebody and somebody will try to tell you, I know what you're going through when you're going through a difficult time. And sometimes, of course, they're clueless. But at the minyan, when people have lost relatives, some under difficult circumstances, and they put an arm around you and somebody sits next to you, and then you jointly do the Kaddish together, and then you do a l'chaim afterwards, and then you schmooze in the breakfast room. It makes it a way that you start your day. It builds up a camaraderie and it helps you deal with a very difficult, gaping moment in your life. As I said, so much to the point, if I were to go around the room now and you ask how many people that are here, and I see a lot of the millionaires now, almost all of them are not in mourning right now, but they've been coming. And I remember from my time, the original people that always had, there's always somebody, a group that are responsible for leading the minyan. Which you need somebody to head it up, not just clergy, but lay people. And those people are responsible for indoctrinating and bringing people into the fold and making a very difficult time a lot more palatable. But before you get to the Shiva process, we have to go through the actual process of the death and the burial. So death is not the end of existence. You know, this the theme of the last two of the week and this week and last week is all about the soul and the survivability of the soul. As we discussed in last week's class, the partnership within the body and the soul. The soul was made in the image of God, more so than the body, even though we're told in the Talmud that there are three partners in creation. You have the biological parents, and then God is also the partner. The rabbis maintain, of course, God created the whole body and everything in existence, but God is the one that also brings in the soul to an existence. Each and every soul was created long before there was a body. And God makes a decision which soul to pair up to which body. Can't tell you why that happens that way, but each soul is in its allotted body, and they're pairing together. The body needs to work in tandem with the soul. And when our time is up, the body goes back to its roots, to its origin point. The Torah describes Adam's formation from the dust of the earth, and you have the breath of God, is what we say. It's a text we use at the actual each and every burial. Our deeds and soul will outlive the physical body. In the book of Ecclesiastes, it says, sums it up best, the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. In this case, when we refer to spirit, we mean the soul. Remember, we spoke about 5 different levels of soul, 3 that are much more attainable, and 4 or 5 are the much higher levels. We have an interesting discussion in Exodus 33:18. Moses asked God, show me your glory. So there, basically, Moses was the only prophet that was able to converse with God in real time. Whenever he wanted to speak to God, he did. Every other prophet had to be in some kind of subconscious state, whether in a daydream or in a sleep, but Moses could. But Moses wanted to become even closer to God than possible. And God responds to him, you cannot see my face, for a man shall not see me and live. One can deduce from that exchange that the soul has some kind of a vision of God after the death of the body. Because God says you can't see me and live. So clearly there must be something that the soul is able to see that the body cannot. This is the reason why if you're in a room with somebody, unfortunately, and I know I see some physicians around the room, and some of you have been in the room and somebody has passed in your presence, one of the first things we do is we close their eyes. If their eyes are open at death, you close them shut. And that is because they have perceived the glory of the heaven in some undescribable way, right before they're passing. We'll speak about that in a minute, what that means. And they no longer are exposed to the harsh realities of the world. I have been present at the very moment of somebody's expiration. And it's very interesting to note that you can see within the face. Some of them are very tranquil. And in some cases, I've been in the room right before they're passing. I don't know if any of you have seen this, and you start to see them staring at the ceiling. So they're lying down, they're not looking ahead, they're looking up. And it's clear that they're experiencing some kind of a vision toward their actual journey. Our sages teach that the dead are aware of their surroundings. The soul transmigrates in stages. It doesn't just leave the body and immediately go back to heaven. We're told that the soul will hover around for the entire 11 months. So even when you go to the cemetery, and that's one of the reasons why we don't leave the body alone by strict Jewish law. If you go to the local funeral home here, they have a group of people, and they have a shomer, which stays with the body overnight. And you say psalms with the body. You leave to make sure the body is always with company. There's a state of confusion when the soul has to start leaving the body. It doesn't know what to do. For its entire life of the body, it's being partners with it. And all of a sudden, the body is no longer functioning and the soul is already in an exit point, but it doesn't know quite what to do. According to the Talmud, these are some somber questions one can expect when you go up to heaven or before the day of judgment. First question is, did you take care of your business honestly? I would recommend all of us give an honest answer because all our deeds are recorded. So the best of the lawyers in the world are not going to help you. God knows what's in everybody's mind, what's in everybody's heart. If a person was dishonest, if you cheated, God knows. Second question, did you set aside regular time for Torah study? Third question, did you ensure the continuity of Judaism by perpetuating the world and having children? And the last question, did you look forward to the actual redemption and coming of the world to come? Our sages state that 1 hour in the next world is much greater pleasure for the soul than the entire existence in the human body of its entire life. So then why do we fear death if there's so much to look forward to? And why do we cry? There was a very famous rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda, cried on his deathbed, and his students were surrounding him, and they thought he was crying because he was afraid. And he said, that's not the case. I'm crying because I'm well aware that I'm running out of options, and soon I won't be able to do any more good deeds and interact with you. And then whatever deeds I have, I take with me as part of my layaway plan, and hopefully they'll serve me well in the next world. It's clear, obviously, that we're crying and grieving because we know that the norm has changed forever. The Sunday phone call, the day-to-day lunches, the outreach, anything that you did with a deceased is no longer there available for you. And now you have to live with it between your ears. And we're well aware that when that moment finally comes, that it's no longer there for us. There's a wonderful Hasidic parable, a nice story that was told, just to emphasize a point, what happens in the day of judgment. So the very rich miser passed away, and he didn't use his money in the blessings that God gave it to him. He hoarded away his money, didn't help people. And he was waiting in line for his moment. And he got to view as the judge, whoever the judge is, was in judgment over each individual. And as each individual came, they got to make their case. And he started to feel more and more confident in his chances. Finally, his time came around and he stood before the judge. And the judge says to him, do you recognize that being wealthy is a blessing from God? He says, absolutely. He says, well, why don't you help people around you? Why don't you give to them? Why were you miserly with your money? So he thought he was dealing with another businessman and tried to handle himself up in the heavens. He says, well, I could have done a better job. But how about this? Why don't you identify some really good causes? And I'll take out a check right now and we'll make good on this. And the judge responds to him, here we don't accept checks, we only accept receipts. And it's a very powerful story because once you get up there, as quick as you are, and some people have this innate ability to sell any situation, extricate, they're so confident in their abilities, but what we call in the world of the truth, there's none of that. We're told a story in the Talmud where an individual was able to go up to heaven and he was able to come back down. And his father asked him, what did you see? And he said, it seems to be upside down. He says, what do you mean? He says, well, everyone in prestige in this world, everyone that was like a big macher and carried themselves with emphasis is on the lower totem. The poorer people and all of the righteous people are in the upper totem. And his father said, you saw the world of the truth. That's why it's called Olam HaEmet, Olam or Emes, depending on your pronunciation. Now, going back to the stages of death, toward the person's decline, there are obviously telltale signs. I'm sure, unfortunately, many of you in this room have gotten them from hospice. And they start to tell you when the body temperature is dropping, when the skin color is starting to change, the breathing is becoming more and more labored. And we do our best to give the body and soul a good send-off. Generally, when that happens, clergy will get a phone call. And we rush over. It was always, when I was here, it was first man up. Whoever's around went straight to the hospice or to the home hospice, wherever the individual was. And we did last rites. It's called the vidui, confessional. So if the individual was still conscious, you did the Shema with them, and you did some text with them and try to say with you, repeat the words after, where you take some ownership of your sins. If the individual was not conscious, then we did it on their behalf. We say the Shema, we do last rites, we ask God for forgiveness for anything that they've done wrong, and hopefully that they should come before God with a clean slate. So this is known as the vidui. Interesting to note that Shema is one of the first prayers you teach a child, and it's really the last prayer we go out of the world saying. That's how important the Shema is. Now, how does it work that we are able to do the confessional for the individual? So there's a principle in the Talmud which teaches that I can be your messenger, representative. So some examples would be, when you hear about somebody traveling to Israel, you say, here's $5, give it for me at the hotel. So now they become your messenger. And when they give their charity, it's as though you've done it yourself. Another example would be, truthfully, for the commandment, when you do have a son, the father is supposed to be the mohel. Now, unless you're really trained in that, most fathers just at the mere thought would probably fail. So you hire a mohel, and by hiring the mohel, you fulfill the commandment as though you've done it yourself. Another example would be when you give over, unfortunately, a divorce document, otherwise known as a get. So you can send over a messenger. It's a little uncomfortable. Not every, most of the time, divorce isn't pleasant. The last thing you want to see is your former wife or husband. So you send somebody over and say, sure, here's your get, but obviously they know it's coming. And that's, again, the same principle. We do the same thing with shalach manot and Purim. If you can't make it and you want to give somebody the shalach manot, you can give them the part of the gifts that you do on Purim, and you credit it for doing it yourself. Now, one has to understand you can only do it within reason. You can't just say, well, why don't you go to Minyan for me? Or, or whatever you want to do. It clearly doesn't work that way. Now, it's an interesting discussion, as we'll talk about a little later in tonight's session, is about Kaddish. Kaddish is really, first line mourner is responsible to say Kaddish. Now, if you know in your heart of hearts that you cannot make that commitment every day to be at the minyan, so you take an insurance policy, either through the synagogue, and I'm sure it's still the same, where you got a list of names of people who are paid towards having Kaddish said for them. And the individual is supposed to look at the name ahead of time as a saying the Kaddish, or you give to an institution. And somebody will get paid directly, and somebody's going to be a minyan every single day. And Kaddish is said on your behalf. But optimally, you really should say the Kaddish. Now, I'll tell you an interesting story is that before I came to Cleveland, I was a Cantor in Fort Lauderdale in a city called Coconut Creek. It's 7 miles south of Boca. So I went to the daily minyan twice a day there and get to know the people. And I've seen this one man there, and he's like saying perpetual Kaddish. Now we have somebody that does perpetual Kaddish here. We won't mention her by name. She's a good person, and she's out there for a different reason. And I looked at this man,
17 years.
and I couldn't understand. I thought he's like Job, poor guy. It's just like he's got people dying all around him. So finally, I was trying to mind my business, but I had to go over. I did notice that he took out a little book. He was a paid Kaddish sayer. And he was saying Kaddish for like 20 people. No exaggeration. He was saying Kaddish each and every day. He saw the Hebrew name, and he did it. So the principle applies to the dead person also. The person that's soon to be dead, that we can do the prayers on their behalf. Now, there are also stages of mourning before we get to the Shiva. So there's a stage that some people aren't so well aware of, and that's the very interim phase. When a person dies, what is the status of the mourners?
Onem.
It's an onen, right? Onim or onen. Somebody is in a semi-quasi state of mourning. So you cannot say Kaddish yet because
They didn't bury them.
you didn't bury him. But the rabbis absolve you from putting on tefillin and talit. And basically, as soon as the burial takes on, you transition from the first Kaddish right away into the Shiva phase, the 7 days. Now, we also know at the burial, which really resonates and hits home, either if you have a graveside or they do it at the chapel, depending where you're doing it, they tear your clothing. So depending how you want to do that, you can have a ribbon, you can have a tie, you can have a scarf. Some people just tear the suits. That is an indication of that your heart is torn, you have a gaping hole, and that represents a tear in your heart. On a more mystical level, we're told that some of the sages describe the body as clothing for the soul. So now that the body is no longer in effect anymore, you're opening it up, so to speak, just to show that the soul can move on to its next phase. It's very difficult because at the actual time you do the kriya, the tearing, you have to make a blessing. And as you know, sometimes people are very angry at the loss of someone with God. And the blessing is, blessed are you, Lord our God, the truthful judge. We don't understand the decision God makes. And anyone who tries to tell you otherwise, I wouldn't believe them. When a person's time comes, there's no way to run away from it. We know there's a story actually with King David. King David knew through prophecy that he was going to die on Shabbat. And he knows that there's an angel of death. It's called the Malach HaMavet, or you probably heard it with a more of a Yiddish accent, Malach HaMavis. This angel is tasked with taking your soul. So he knows that God won't take your soul. The angel is not empowered when you're learning Torah. So he was davening and then learning Torah straight through Shabbat. And we're told that the angel came right outside his window and couldn't get in because you're studying. So he started rattling the tree. And it distracted him to the point we stopped learning, and then it took his soul. So that you can't run away from it, just as we know. Regardless what people want to think, basically, that's just a stage of life that we cannot get away from. Now, God gives us an ability within grieving to overcome the grief. And that is to say, you're not allowed to excessively grieve. However, within a time period, the grieving will lessen. And that's not to say that the individual is no longer important in your life. Of course they are. And of course, they're going to be triggers. Whether you're around the holiday season, whether it's Pesach or Rosh Hashanah or Thanksgiving, or you hear a song or you see a picture and makes you think of them, then your emotions are going to come up. But God gives us the ability to live our lives, which is we're allowed to, at some point when you fulfill the mourning requirement, you're allowed to live your life. And God gives us the tools to do so. And how do we know this? Because we know from Jacob. So when Jacob favored his son Joseph, if you remember, we spoke about the first session about colors. He gave him the tunic, the colors, and he also favored him outwardly. And the brothers couldn't take him. And when he went to search for them, they took his coat and they dipped in an animal's blood and they sent it back home. Obviously understanding that Jacob's going to deduce that his son was killed by a wild animal. Now the brothers amongst themselves figured out that there's 11 of them. One of them was home, so he wasn't part of it, which was Benjamin, but there was the grandchildren, there was the wives. You're missing one kid, you've got 11 others. We'll get you through it and life will go on. We won't have to deal with Joseph. We're told for the entire period until Jacob got reunited with Joseph, he was grieving the entire time, to the point he wasn't able to receive prophecy. The rabbis tell us in order to receive prophecy, you have to be in a good frame of mind, happy. And the rabbis explain why. Because Joseph wasn't dead. So he couldn't get over it. He could feel the soul. In Hebrew, we have an expression, lev margish lev. The soul could feel the other soul, and he couldn't get over it. So very interesting to note, the last portion of Genesis is called, anyone? No, that's in Leviticus. That's this week's portion. That was last week's portion. Vayechi. As soon as he's reunited with Joseph and they go down to Egypt, he starts to live again. He's happy. He gets over his melancholy. He's no longer depressed. He's reunited with his son. Not to say that death will always bring us closer. And we make a point. We don't run away from death in our religion. It's not one and done where you bury the person, you sit through yeshiva and you say bye. The rabbis make a very important point that you have to remember your dead on the yortzeit, on the day of the death, and Yizkor multiple times a year. Yizkor, you come to synagogue and you do it. You do it on Yom Kippur and you do it on the 3 other festivals, Pesach, Sukkot, and Shavuot. You constantly always have to remember where you came from. I think we get in trouble as an individual and as a society when people forget that lesson. When they somehow think, I arrived at my own virtue, nobody carried me on their shoulders, and I'm here, it's all about me, that's when we get into a me society. The fact that you have to go to a Yizkor and say, you have a word from mom and dad, or you think about your grandparents or somebody else who raised you, an uncle or aunt, that makes you have humility, but it also makes you have a connection to your past. Now, this is a very interesting law that's very hard to fulfill. Optimally, when the person dies, you're supposed to bury as quick as possible. And we know it's not practical, because you got nowadays, people live all across the country, and they want to be able to give the deceased a send-off. Sometimes they want to speak, but they want to be there. I remember about 15, 16, 17 years ago, maybe, we had somebody that had a son in South Korea and a son in Guam. Can't get too much further than that. The lady died on a Sunday. We did the funeral on a Friday. Jerusalem takes it next level. Jerusalem has night lights.
Yep.
And they'll do a funeral well into the night or into the early morning hours to fulfill this mandate of burying immediately. Now, it's important to know the difference between the day of burial and the day of death, at least in the first cycle. Because when you do your yortzeit, the anniversary, the first year anniversary goes from the day of burial. So it could be sometimes 3 or 4 days. Yours 2 and on, in perpetuity, is from the time of death, the day of death. And remember, you go by the Hebrew date, not the English date. That's why it's always good. There's many benefits to being a member in any shul.
You get enough.
Many, and one of them is to get your yortzeit notice. They do it for you. No, you get this little email alert or letter in the mail, and they tell you exactly what day it is. And you come out and you say Kaddish. At the funeral itself, once you get to, once again, depending which phase you use, whether you do a graveside only or a burial, we give the attendees a very unique mitzvah. And that is to be a participant in the funeral. And I don't mean as a speaker, to help cover them up, to put dirt on the aron, on the casket. And the rabbis call this a chesed shel emet. This is the highest form of kindness for a very simple reason. If I do you a favor, you do me, there's a quid pro quo. The understanding, yeah, I do for you like a relationship, and you do for me. Doesn't mean you should keep score by any means, because that's not a healthy way to do it, but there's an understanding. I'll be there for you, you'll be there for me. But in this moment, the deceased can't be there, can never replay. So you should, whenever you have an opportunity, I don't say you should go to funerals too often, but whenever you have an opportunity, even if you don't know the deceased so well, it's a very big mitzvah to participate in filling up the grave. So you can get really what we call the chesed she'emet, just the true value of the actual mitzvah, the kindness deeds. Yes, sir.
Why do they use the back of the shovel?
As to show that it's, so what Ron is referring to, you're supposed to invert the shovel.
Yeah.
To show that it's not a normal use of the shovel. There's nothing normal about this day. So what you're supposed to do, and it gets very difficult when you have lousy weather or very wet weather, because here we have like clay-like sand. You got to invert and take it off the mound and take your first shovel inverted. And then after you've done that, you just take it off the bed. Not to mention, you're also not supposed to pass the shovel from one person to the next.
Yeah.
That's one of our superstitions, that we don't want to pass death from one person to the next. It's just more of a superstitious thing. So you say, you get to the cemetery, you fill it up, you've already done Kaddish, your first official Kaddish. There is a Kaddish we're going to talk about a little in a few minutes. Special Kaddish that's done at the cemetery, but people aren't familiar with Aramaic. It talks about the world to come and all different things. And so we just go with the normal Mortis Kaddish that people are familiar with. You get to the house, as you know, and you wash your hands because there's impurity coming in contact with the death. And then you'll notice as you come into the house, one of the first things you'll notice is that the mirrors are covered. So there's a number of reasons given for that. One is we want to avoid the physicality and the vanity in order to concentrate on the reality of being a mourner and the soul that's just left the body of the mourner. People expect you to look poorly. It's okay. If you come to a Shiva home, nobody's expecting you to be dressed like you're going to a wedding or some kind of an event. You're supposed to look beat down. And if you look rugged, that's what you're supposed to be. Mirror represents a social acceptance through one's appearance. And Shiva is about introspection and personal loss. Covering the mirror symbolizes withdrawing from society. Withdrawal. And you're not so concerned about appearances. In the general halakha, in general, you're not allowed to pray in front of a mirror to begin with, even when you're not in having Shiva. Because you're supposed to be focusing on God instead of thinking mirror, mirror on the wall. And you can finish the rest of the rhyme, right? You're not supposed to be there enamored with yourself. So you're not supposed to, if there's a mirror in the room and you're not even in a Shiva home, move away from the mirror. Or turn around and have your back towards the mirror because it's actually forbidden. Now, you'll notice in a Shiva home that people are either walking in slippers or in socks. Back in the day, in the time when the rabbis made these laws, leather was a sign of luxury. I'm sure most people, if you speak to nowadays, would say, would you prefer to wear leather shoes or sneakers? I'll be the first one to sign up for sneakers. I'm not interested in wearing leather shoes. But leather was a sign of luxury. So therefore, they walk around in the socks or they walk around in the slippers. You know that they drop the chairs down to the ground because the actual Shiva means to be seated. Now, if you take the vowels and you rearrange them in the word Shiva, you come up with the word Sheva, which is 7. So the optimum requirement, I'm in the non-judge free zone here. I don't judge anyone. Some people come up with this idea that you can do a 3-day Shiva. By the letter of the law, you're supposed to do 7 days. Now, you could control your hours. You don't have to say, crack of dawn, when my newspaper gets delivered, come on over it. You can sit there, say 4 to 6, or just around your minion time. But by the letter of the law, you're supposed to stay home, you're supposed to stop working, and it's a time for you to face up to your grieving. Now, I think you have noticed this, and I'm sure many people, unfortunately, what sometimes you see in a Shiva home, it becomes a little too jovial. It's like you're there for a get-together, and you hear people cracking jokes and laughing all the time and making fun. And then what is the appropriate conversation to have with a mourner? So you can talk about the person, your memories. You can talk about what you know about that person that this person may not know. That's something that would inspire them. I saw a reference several years ago about somebody going through Shiva, and they said the greatest visit that they had was from one of the local rabbis that knew them. He sat down right next to them. He held their hands, and he got emotional. And then within 2 minutes, he left. See, it becomes a very dicey thing when you start talking and asking and getting involved in frivolous conversation. It becomes too much of a party-like atmosphere. You'll also notice at a Shiva home, you get the candles. So the Shiva home, the candle is put on. We give you one here. Bookats makes it very easy for you. They give you a candle that lasts 7 days, so you don't have to keep on lighting a candle. You do not make a blessing when you light the candle. You just put it in a room somewhere, and you let it burn for 7 days. The Jew is compared to a flame. Soul of man is the soul of man is the lamp of God, metaphorically speaking. And when a soul leaves the world, a dark shadow is left. So how do we compensate for this darkness? Through light. And the way to do that is to light a candle. If you remember the old yahrzeit boards, all of them used to have a little candle in the back of the synagogue, right? Like electric candles. And when they would see who has yahrzeit, you'd have like an electric candle. Now it's much more, modern, and you don't do the candles anymore. But the whole idea is candles are something that the soul enjoys, which is why you light a candle also at the yahrzeit. When you know you have a yahrzeit, the night before you light a candle. Also ahead of holidays, and I'm not talking about the lights, the lights that the women light, not the Shabbat candles or the Yom Tov candles. The special candles for mourners you light in advance of a holiday. Rabbi Bachya ben Asher explains that the soul derives joy from the light. The soul is made of divine light, and therefore providing a flame brings a joy and solace. Another sage, Rabbi Asher ben Yechios, posits that lighting a candle prior to Yom Kippur helps the soul with their own atonement. So once again, not talking about your Yom Kippur candles. I'm talking about actual yahrzeit candle. We also honor God with a flame, who in turn forgives the deceased and watches over them. On a more mystical note, a candle represents a person's connection to the divine. They talk about the lamp and the wick, which represents the body. The flame represents the soul. And when the candle is lit, both the wick and the fuel combust and create a light that goes in an ascension towards heaven. The flame has 3 components. The inner, which is the black and the blue, which hugs the wick. The brighter body, which is outside of the black and the blue, those other colors. And then subtle aura that surrounds the flame. And the mystics really bring this nice full circle to say, those 3 components match the 3 components of the first part of the class we taught last week, which is the ruach, the nefesh, and the neshama, the spirit and the soul, all part of that whole process. So in other words, it's really a good thing to do to light a candle. Now, during Yizkor, and after the first year, the soul is given permission to come back. I can't tell you how that works. I don't know how that is, if they had good behavior or not. Maybe God lets them come down. But people say it, and I know it sounds hokey. I'm sure you've met people, and maybe you felt it. You ever said something, you feel somebody's presence around you? It sounds hokey, but we do believe that the soul hovers around and it's allowed to come. They're given permission to come back. The soul takes delight upon the candle, that you light in its memory, and anything you do in its memory is going to be beneficial. Now, when you go to a minyan, you have the minyan. Mincha Mariv, or depending seasonally what time of the year you're in. Sometimes if you're in the winter months, it's hard to get a minyan at 5 o'clock. You're only going to do Mariv. But I'm going to go in the time of the year that we now. In the Orthodox movement, you know, they rotate the times for minyan in accordance to what time of the year you're in. So ideally is you have the mincha service and the morning we'll get to do a mourner's kaddish. Then the rabbi is going to do a teaching. Now, the Hebrew word for soul is neshama. You have to take my word for this, but if you rearrange the letters, same letters, but in a different order, you spell the word Mishnah. Mishnah is a text put together by the Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And from the Mishnah, which the multiple of many of them in each Talmud, you have the Gemara, the Talmud that comes through there. So you learn a text in the merit of the deceased. And what they try to do furthermore is they will take a Mishnah and they'll try to spell out the deceased name over the week. So whatever the letters are, the first name, they'll say the first Mishnah is Mishnah Aleph. And then I'll go to Bet. And if it's further on, they'll go to one that's 200. They don't have to be connected to one another. Each day can be a different subject matter. And you learn a teaching each and every day to help elevate the soul, to give them as much as an opportunity to go to the next world, if you will, with as much inventory and good deeds as possible. And that's something that we can actually do. And there's a lot more to speak on the subject, but I wanted to do a little bit of a teaching. So due to time constraints, we're going to transition to now the subject of Kaddish.
Before you leave, can I ask a question?
Oh, yeah.
Let's go back.
You don't have to wait till I'm leaving. You can ask now. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Before you, all right. My question is, recently, I have heard a number of different rabbis at a funeral at the cemetery say that at this time, we're going to ask the deceased for forgiveness.
Yes, I do the same thing, yeah.
Tila.
Okay, what's that all about? And this deceased is supposed to,
So the same concept that we presented before,
yes,
where you can act as an intermediary.
yes,
In an ideal world, everyone would have did the checks and balances. When you know you're getting sick, it's a good idea to make amends. So let's say you haven't had a relative that you haven't spoken to in umpteen years, you don't get along with your neighbor. You treated somebody poorly at work, somebody treated you badly. So what we want to do is at the grave, as the soul is getting ready to transmigrate, we want to be an emissary yet again, like we do when they're dying on the deathbed. So we say on behalf of the dead, we know that they did anything or was not intentional, and had they had a chance to rethink, they wouldn't have done it. It was unintentional. We know anyone that's standing within the cemetery today or somebody that couldn't make it. Now, we're taking some liberty, because you know, I don't have to tell you. I mean, I did a funeral as part of my transition process where I'm on call from Bookets. I did a funeral actually at the Chesterland. And there was a very small family, and the guy said, "You can't invite my brother." Well, he's paying for the funeral. What am I gonna tell him? Your brother has to be there? I said, you know, at some point in time, you just go like this, you're in charge, you know? So even then, I can't say in good conscience, because he was not very involved in the mother's stage of illness. And he was very angry at his brother for just kind of taking an exit from that whole process. And he didn't want him there. So I can in good conscience say, and I know she's gonna forgive him, and you're gonna forgive her. It's kind of a thing, but we take some license with it as best as we can. And we act as an intermediary for both sides. Him forgiving the crowd forgiving him.
is there a special prayer that we say?
The way I've seen it is just kind of your own verbiage. But the verbiage has to contain the word forgiveness. You know, like Cecile is gonna forgive everyone for anything she did. I can't name the sins. Ultimately, you know, God will forgive that which we do to God, but God holds us accountable for one another. God does not forgive what you do to another person, or another person does to you. They have to make amends with you. But that being said, we try the best as we can to lessen the blow. Yossi, go ahead.
Quick question. Because we believe that the deceased is tameh, is not
Yes.
pure anymore.
Right.
Is it the time when the soul leaves the body? We assume
The
that
soul is right above the body, it's still there. So the soul is pure all the time. It's the body itself. Death is an impurity, which is why
no making hallelujah.
a Kohen is not allowed into a cemetery, because a Kohen is not allowed to come in contact with the dead. But death itself is always going to bring some form of impurity.
Let me say something quickly. In 1999, my mother passed away, and I was trying to get her as soon as I came. As soon as I came, they took me right to Hulon, to the cemetery. I went into the room. She was still just purified by the lady. There was a lady that took care of my mom, and I was so emotional, I was trying to touch her face. She was already, so she said, don't touch her. She is pure, you're not.
Because they've already done the cleaning
Yeah, they did
process.
the cleaning.
You know, what they do is they take the dead body and they do a mikvah. You go to the bottom floor of Bukats, they have a mikvah there, and they dip the body and then they put the clothing on. And that's what they do. So on a lighter note, because I remember I told you it's a good thing just to always have a little humor. I remember something popped into my head as I was preparing for this class. It's something I heard years ago, but it's applicable. So an Iranian airline is flying near the Israel border. And it starts to get with a Mayday. Well, the engine is going. We got 4, 1 is gone. So the controller says, just let us know, Mayday, second engine is gone. Just let us know if you come closer. Mayday, third engine is gone. Please tell us what to do. The controller says, say after me. He says, what do you mean? He says, say what I'm saying. He says, Yiskada Shmei Rab. So it's a light humor about death, but you gotta have a little bit, you can't get 2 more. Yes, sir.
Then the soul enter the newborn. You go from the womb or after?
At conception. When the baby is conceived, that's when the soul is there. And we're told, I don't want to get too much off topic, it's a very interesting discussion. Within the womb, you have the soul, you have the physical baby, and you have an angel that's teaching the whole Torah to the baby. That's why the rabbis, this little spot below your nose, I don't know, Dr. Basena will tell me what the technical term, that spot. What is it? Philtrum. That's for the philtrum. The angel touches you right when you come out, so you should forget the whole Torah. But in terms of the baby inside. So the soul is at conception with the baby, learning Torah, keeping the baby company with the angel.
Did you say the soul stays with the body for 11 months?
Yes, it stays at some point in time within
So it
vicinity
doesn't
of the grave.
elevate.
Correct.
I have a question.
Yes,
So in my profession,
yeah,
I came in close contact with many dead.
yeah,
My profession was to save them.
yeah.
Some of them I was able to, some of them I was not. Am I tameh because I was doing that? What's the story
Even though
there?
your cause is very noble and you're saving a life, and God says saving one life is like saving the world. If you're in contact with a dead person, doesn't matter why you're there, whether you're crossing the road or you're the physician or whatever the circumstance. So now the good news is we're told that we're at a stage in the world that we live now, but even the mikvah would take some of that away. We're not going to be able to come to a point where we're totally pure until the coming of the Messiah. So there's impurities, but yes, Tameh, even if you're a doctor, any circumstance that you come in contact with a dead body, even though your job is to save them and you have no choice.
But in the Torah, there are 2 places that they did that,
Meaning,
meaning CPR, mouth to mouth.
yeah, we spoke about the
They-
last
yeah.
week. So they brought the dead back.
Yeah,
Yeah, we spoke about that last week about
Yeah.
the case of the Elisha. So, but for that instant, the child was dead.
Mhm.
So when you're in contact with a dead person, so yeah, it's a very simple thing. All you have to do is go to a mikveh. You go to a mikveh, or in the time of the temples, they would use the red heifer ashes, which you don't have anymore. So I have to make a decision here because I can do one or two things. I have more to teach about this subject, or we can start Kaddish and continue on to next week. What would you like to do? Start with Kaddish? Wherever we pick up, we pick up.
I do have a question.
Yeah,
That-
well, that may make my decision very easy. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. No, please, go ahead.
I'm a Kohen. I mean,
Yeah,
that always makes things more complicated when you have funerals and the family and the friends. But the one thing that they always do in my family, and I don't know if it's a Jewish tradition or just a my family tradition, when you come in when you, like the family comes when somebody dies before the body's taken away, the calls go out, everybody's there. And the first thing they do is open a window. Is that common or is that my family?
I,
It's a mouse marker thing.
I've not heard of that custom, but
I heard about it
for full
also.
disclosure, it could be something really valid. I've never seen that before.
Because they always,
I don't know if that means that
I heard from my mother as well.
you open the window.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a custom. I've never heard that. So it's good that we learn, and thank you for sharing that idea. I'm not quite sure. I'll have to get back to you and I can look that up and get back to you in advance.
yeah, I was just curious about that.
I'll tell you what I'm gonna do is I want to be able to do the Kaddish in its full entity. I don't like the idea of breaking it up. So what I'm gonna do is I have some other things to share. And then we'll focus on, it's actually a good selling point. You'll have to come back next week for the on all the different Kaddishes and some other things related to that. So very interesting to note, I had a very good friend of mine in Miami Beach. I'm friendly with him and his two brothers, and I still study with him. I call him the rabbi because he's brilliant. And he went to undergrad and he finished in 3 years. Brilliant family, absolutely brilliant. And he said to his father, who was a doctor, a radiologist, and his mom, I would like to go to Israel just for a gap year. I'm ahead of the curve. I'm already, I'm ahead of where most kids are. I'd like to study for a year in Israel to decompress. He was already accepted to U of M medical school. Just delay it. So he goes to Israel for a year. And he goes to Or Sameach, which is like about Teshuvah Yeshiva. And then he gets the bug. And he goes to Eish Torah. And he comes back and he says to his parents, I'd like to go back for a second year. Now, I should add that he was a Kohen. He's in Israel his second year, and he's got to deal with his parents. This is it. After this, you're going to med school. That's it. No more discussion. He goes to his rabbi in Israel, and he says, I'm a Kohen, and one of the things you have to do as a Kohen is work on cadavers. Am I allowed to do it? And he said, I'm sorry to tell you, you're not allowed to.
Medical student.
Yeah, medical school.
We've had that in my family.
No, he's a Kohen who wants to be a medical student.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a Kohen by birth, and part of going through medical school, you have to work on dead bodies. And he said to him, sorry, I can't do it. So the first question you may ask is, how did his father do it? His father didn't ask anyone.
No.
His father didn't ask a rabbi. That's why ignorance is bliss. You don't ask, you proceed on your own, and the chips fall after the fact, and you say, oh, too bad, too sad. So he comes home. And says, how was your time? Amazing. He says, guys, I need to talk to you. And he sits down with them and he says, look, I have to tell you that I know you had dreams of the next generation of a doctor in the family, but it's just not going to happen. And it didn't. He got married. He's got Cantor had 10 children. He runs around like a madman. I was on with him a Zoom last night, matter of fact. He's so dedicated. I'm on a Zoom with a group of guys. He gets up at 4 in the morning to study with us. We know him like going way back when. And he would have been a very brilliant doctor, and he gave up on a very promising career because he didn't want to sacrifice. Furthermore, Now, remember what we said about a Kohen going to a cemetery. There are some that take it next level. So for example, he's one of those. 10 children is a lot of visits to the hospital. What do you have on the bottom floor of a hospital? So we can't go there. So his wife had all of her children in the birthing center. They have such things in Israel, strictly for birthings. And that's what he did. He went there for a birthing center, so there's no risk. Now, I'll tell you even furthermore, you're gonna think this is insane. Not related to him, but there are some Kohanim, when you fly to Israel, it's very meritorious to bury the body in Israel. But in order to bury the body in Israel, you gotta put it in the undercarriage of the plane. They call ahead of time. Is there a body on the plane? And they will not fly.
Does it have to be a Jewish body?
Any kind of body,
Any
but
body.
primarily it's, I think, any kind of body, but I could get back on that one, but they will not fly, some of them. They know there's a body, so El Al has certain flights that will tell you up front, there's no body on the plane. And you don't have to worry. Now, there are some Meshuggah won't even go in some airspace because, and this is, by the way, very, very important. In Israel, there were a couple of rabbis many centuries ago that they knew where rabbis were buried from the Talmud, and people of a generation span that the graves weren't marked properly. So they went and they marked every single grave. It wasn't just for historical perspective, because it starts to affect the Kohanim. So if a Kohen wants to go to a certain area and there's graves in the area, they can't go. So I was with Bruce and a number of other people when we went to Poland years ago on a synagogue mission. And you go to some of the concentration camps, and there's some areas where you can still see pieces of bone in the sand. So they can't go there. So what does a Kohen do if they want to go to the cemetery? So first of all, you go to Bukats, they will open the external doors of the main sanctuary, the main chapel. They open them outwardly, and the Kohanim sit on the outside so they can hear the eulogy. They won't come into the room because, as you know, the casket is in front. So that's one thing to do. At the cemetery, there's a point where you can go up to.
You can stand on the sidewalk.
Stand on the sidewalk. So it becomes a problem if a rabbi decides to become who's a Kohen, decides to become a pulpit rabbi. Part of the job responsibility is to officiate funerals, becomes a problem. So being a Kohen is very nice when you get the first honor, but it's not always cracked up. So you gotta always defer first to the Kohen as a first honor. But it becomes, there's some complexities involved in some of these areas, especially when you go to cemeteries where you stand, and after there's certain areas where, now I'm not telling you some of them won't go to a hospital for treatment, because some say the morgue is several stories well below, but some of them, the mere fact that they're in the same facility as a dead body, I'm not saying it's for everyone, So I'm gonna ask you to do this, we'll take a few more questions. I'm gonna save these for next week. These are all the cottages, so we don't have to make another copy. Any other questions, because we've got a couple of minutes left?
What if the person dies in the plane?
If somebody dies on the way to Israel,
Can I give you this?
I'm sure it's happened. So basically, if a Kohen has to come in contact with the dead, it will. Like, for example, if a Kohen finds a dead body on the road, you've got to bury it. You can't just say, I'm gonna leave the body, because you cannot disgrace the dead body. You can't disgrace a dead body. So there are times where a Kohen will have to put his purity at risk. They'll go to the mikvah. But if a body dies on a plane, I mean, I'm sure they'll do an emergency landing, but there's not, what are you gonna do? You're not gonna tell them, you're not gonna say, get a parachute and jump out the window. Dr. Sand says, why not? The crazy jumps out. Yeah.
Question. What's the chance for an accountant to go to heaven?
Say that again?
What's the chance for an accountant to get to heaven?
That's a very important.
I would assume that your books are pretty good, Jenny. It doesn't make any distinction, whatever career you've had. At the end of the day, You know, we say God knows what's in the Ata Yodea, it says God Razeh Olam, God knows all the secrets. And God knows what's in a person's heart. And God knows what you do with a person. I'll give you a small example. Let's say you don't want to be accused of being unfriendly, and you saw somebody eating a lunch here, because BJ used to have a lot of luncheons and Shabbos, right? And you would have an open policy of inviting people to your house. So you go after them and say, how would you like to come to my house for lunch? You know they've eaten already. Is that a problem? It is a problem because it's not done with good intent. You know, when you say to someone, come on over, it's like really, right? As though somebody's gonna be out of town. How would you like to come over for Sukkot, you know? You know they're gonna be away, so you do it in a way that's really not on the up and up. So there are in every intent, God knows what's in a person's heart, how you go about your business, how you deal with one another. God knows. Now, we are fallible, and this is why we have Yom Kippur, we have the process of Teshuvah. And one rabbi used to say, the last prayer is called Ne'ilah on Yom Kippur, that the last prayer, at Ne'ilah, you have to start doing already repentance, because we've already sinned between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That's just the nature of human beings. So in all seriousness, it's an effort. Very hard to do the perfect all the time, but God knows that. God knows if you make a good effort, He'll let you come there, Yossi, and you can have some good political discussions.
You should ask this question, but I didn't mean, I take it.
I understand. So next week, what we're gonna do is, I'll tell you, initially, we're gonna do 4 Thursday nights in a row. Due to the community calendar, one was Yom Ha'atzmaut, and I think this Thursday night is the Shechter big fundraiser. So we had to kind of bump around. I was gonna teach the last session on Lag BaOmer, which is this Thursday. So I may do some highlights on Lag BaOmer after the Kaddish teaching. So be prepared. We'll do Kaddish first and some more issues. I like this. I think this is a very important idea because Kaddish and the soul, these are something that speak to everyone. Not everybody speaks to the liturgy or other aspects of Judaism. So we're going to spend more time on that for next week.
So that'll be next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday.
Y'all see us next Thursday.
Come in here, come in here and watch the YouTube channel. Go watch the YouTube. Everybody have a great night and go.
If anybody who wants to have a shot